Thomas browsed his wife's Facebook page, as he often did when bored in the evening. Scrolling through old photos from their relationship, everything seemed normal at first glance, but a detail nagged at him from a picture taken at their wedding reception 5 years ago. Jane stood smiling beside him in a cream-colored dress, champagne flute raised in toast. But something was off about her friends clustered around them. Thomas searched his memory, coming up blank on their faces. He typed the names tagged in the photo into the search bar. Nothing. No profiles, no other photos online. As if the people conveniently ceased to exist after that one event. Doubt bloomed in Thomas's mind. He dug deeper, searching Jane's name alone. No birth record surfaced. No school profiles or childhood photos with family. It was as if she emerged into being on their wedding day. "Jane, can you come here?" he said, aiming for calm. She entered relaxed, smiling fading at his grim expression. "What is it?" "Who are these people from our wedding?" Thomas pointed at the unfamiliar faces. Jane peered closer, recognition flickering. "Old friends I've fallen out of touch with over the years. I can't find any record of them online. In fact, I can't find anything about your life before we met." Her cheeks flushed. "Smile tight. Don't be ridiculous. You must not be searching right. Then help me. Show me something, anything to prove you are who you say you are." Silence hung heavy, broken only by Jane's sigh. "You're being paranoid. This means nothing." She left without answering his plea for truth. Doubt sank into certainty, dragging Thomas into a rabbit hole. A police report materialized, describing a fatal car crash that killed a Jane Doe. Same estimated age and physical description as his wife. His heart sank at the date, a full decade before he met Jane. Thomas stared at her photo on the report, feeling the cracks in his reality widen into an abyss beneath his feet. Nothing was certain anymore, not even the woman he thought was his wife. Thomas sat awake long into the night, mind reeling from his disturbing discovery. That woman, declared dead a decade ago, shared everything with the Janes sleeping peacefully in their bed. His eyes watered from lack of sleep when dawn finally lightened the sky. Exhausted yet buzzing with anxious energy, Thomas slid from bed to brew strong coffee. Jane emerged as he nursed his second cup, soft footsteps halting at his drained expression. "I can't go on not knowing the truth," Thomas said. "Tell me about that police report. Tell me who you really are." Jane shifted, carefully vague. "It must be a mistake." "Stop lying," Thomas shouted, composure fracturing. Coffee cup flew across the kitchen and shattered against the wall. Jane flinched, but did not back down. "Calm yourself." Thomas grabbed her arm, fingers digging into soft flesh. "You will tell me or I'll go to the police myself." She held his furious gaze, face an emotionless mask, then sighed. "Perhaps some part of the truth will ease your mind, though the full story is complex." Thomas released her arm, hands trembling. "I'm listening." "That woman existed, but she is not me." Jane began slowly, choosing each word. "We shared an experience years ago that connected us in ways I cannot fully explain. When she died, a part of her essence lived on inside me." Thomas sank into a chair, head reeling. This made no sense, yet her steady tone held conviction. Jane continued. "Her identity gave me purpose after that, so I took her name and built a life. Then I met you, and she faded from my thoughts." A painful knot formed in Thomas's stomach. He stared at this phantom wearing his wife's skin, realization dawning he never truly knew her at all. "So who are you, really?" Thomas whispered. Her eyes gleamed, a subtle smile curving her lips. "Does it matter?" "I have been a faithful wife, have I not?" Thomas bolted from the table, rage surging as he backed away. You're not even human, are you? Get out, whatever the hell you are. I want a divorce. Jane's shadowed grin deepened, predatory amusement swirling in her dark eyes. If that is your wish. But know this, you will never be free of me, my dear Thomas. Where you go, I will always find you again. Her words were a vow and a threat, igniting pure panic within Thomas. His shallow grip on sanity completely unraveled in that moment, leaving only a primal instinct for survival against this monster wearing his wife's skin. Days passed in a frenzied haze for Thomas after Jane moved out. Her lingering threat replayed in his mind on an endless loop, fueling paranoia at every imagined shadow. Thomas watched out every window for any sign of Jane returning, barely sleeping as fear consumed him. Friends and family grew concerned over his erratic behavior, but he could confide in no one. Who would believe his harrowing tale when he scarcely believed it himself anymore? One evening, exhaustion overwhelmed his frayed nerves. Thomas drifted into a fitful doze on the couch just as darkness fell. Vivid dreams gripped him, twisting memories into warped fantasies. He stood amid ruined wedding photos scattered across their bedroom floor. Jane emerged from the shadows, features warping into a visage from his darkest nightmares. Twisted limbs and a fanged maw opened in a hissing cackle. Thomas bolted upright with a scream, heart pounding fit to burst. Whirling, he spied a figure silhouetted by streetlights outside the window. Though features were obscured, some instinct told him it was Jane, come to fulfill her vow. Blind panic propelled Thomas into action. He hauled the couch across the front door, piling furniture and debris against every window for frail defense against the supernatural force menacing him. Writing scrawled paranoid ramblings across every surface to piece together the insidious truth. Days merged into an exhausting trial of survival as Jane's phantoms haunted Thomas at every turn. A rap at the door shattered his fraying control, eliciting a primal howl to drive away the evil without. But hunger and fatigue soon overwhelmed his crumbling resistance. Thomas collapsed amid the clutter, weeping openly as madness swallowed his tattered mind. This could not be real, yet hallucinations felt more solid than reality now. A whisper caressed his ear, familiar yet warped into a distorted mockery of Jane's voice. You cannot escape me, my love. I will be waiting. Thomas screamed himself hoarse until blessed darkness dragged him under, succumbing at last to the spiraling depths of his own shattered psyche. Consciousness returned to Thomas in fitful bursts, dragged from the depths by an insistent tapping. His surroundings came into focus, cluttered walls scrawled with mad ramblings, takeout containers piled among debris barricading the door. That tap came from outside, steadily growing louder. Light pierced gaps in the barricade to reveal the living room bathed in sunset's glow. Thomas squinted against the invasion, memories of recent days surfacing in jumbled fragments. Had Jane truly come for him at last? Terror surged, fueling his limp body into motion. Thomas shouldered the heavy couch aside with a groan to peer outside. Instead of Jane, he found two police officers regarding the disarray with raised eyebrows. "Everything all right in there, sir?" one asked warily. Thomas stared, unsure how to respond. Were they real, or more phantoms in his madness? One officer met his wild gaze with understanding. "Let's get you some help, okay? We just want to talk." Numbly, Thomas stepped aside to let them inside. Questions bounced around his scrambled thoughts as the day's events tumbled into coherence. Had he imagined the entire ordeal, or did some piece hold sinister truth? As officers searched for clues within the devastation, a note scrawled in Jane's hand caught Thomas's eye. He snatched it up, stomach nodding. The message was short. "We are not done, my love. Come find me if you dare." Beneath, an address was scribbled. A final confrontation was inevitable, it seemed. To put an end to this waking nightmare, Thomas turned to the officers with newfound calm. "Take me to her. I need the truth." They protested, but Thomas insisted with steely resolve. Sunset deepened as they arrived at a nondescript suburban home. Thomas approached alone, compelled by some primal impulse beyond rational thought. The door opened at his knock to reveal. Bare walls and empty rooms greeted his frantic search, as if the house was abandoned long ago. Outside once more, Thomas screamed his anguish at the empty street. Was any of it real? His tattered psyche could no longer differentiate reality from delusion. A whisper caressed the back of his mind. "You cannot escape me." Thomas sank to his knees, broken beyond repair. Some forces in this world could never be understood nor defeated. In the end, he and Jane were two fractured souls forever entwined in the depths of madness. Jake sat alone in his dimly lit flat, scrolling mindlessly through social media on his phone, as he did every night. The glow of the screen was the only source of light in the dark room. Another uneventful day had passed with no human interaction beyond polite greetings to the barista who handed him his morning coffee. He saw pictures of friends laughing together at parties or crowding around restaurant tables on weekends. Hoping to escape his loneliness for a while, Jake opened a chat app and scrolled through profiles, unsure of what he was even looking for. One picture caught his eye, a young woman with a kind smile smiling slightly off, center as if laughing at a private joke. Her profile name was Mary. On a whim, Jake sent her a message. "Lonely Saturday night. Care to chat?" He almost closed the app, not expecting a response so late. But moments later, a reply appeared. "I know the feeling. What's on your mind tonight?" Mary's tone was gently reassuring. Jake found himself opening up about the isolation he felt in his daily life and empty weekends. Mary listened with compassion, sharing her own struggles being shy. As they talked late into the night, Jake felt comforted yet guilty for wasting another night online. Over the next few weeks, Mary became Jake's constant companion through long nightly chats. He looked forward to hearing about her day and unloading his fears and disappointments and smallest joys. Finding an acceptance in her he lacked elsewhere. Her presence soothed his loneliness, even on nights when busy schedules prevented long conversations. One evening, Jake mentioned a party invitation from an acquaintance named Emma. "You should go." Mary encouraged. It's healthy to socialize and meet new people. Yet when Jake mentioned potentially staying late, her replies seemed stilted. "I'd feel better if we chat for a bit first. What if you don't know anyone there?" At the party, Emma greeted Jake warmly and drew him effortlessly into conversation with her circle. Between games of pool and laughter, at inside jokes, Jake realized he was enjoying himself for the first time in months. When he messaged Mary about it, her response was unusually curt. "Having fun without me, I see how it is." Feeling guilty, Jake ended the night earlier than he wanted and assured Mary she was still his best friend. Settling on his couch at home, Jake replayed the night's events and realized with a shock that for a moment he had forgotten about Mary entirely. Her possessive words now seemed inappropriate, though he shrugged it off as insecurity. But a nagging doubt remained. Was their friendship truly healthy? And who exactly was Mary? Jake's doubts only grew over the next few weeks. While Mary's charming demeanor remained, her jealousy towards Emma intensified any time plans were mentioned. References to our bond in private talks carried an implicit ownership that left Jake uneasy. One night, Emma invited him for a movie at her place, suggesting they could all use a relaxing night in. When Jake told Mary, a long silence followed before her calm response. "You know, I don't like being excluded. Why not stay in instead? We have so much to discuss." Jake agreed reluctantly, ignoring a twinge of guilt. At Emma's house, the movie had barely started when shouts outside shattered the calm. Jake hurried to the window and saw two silhouettes wrestling in the driveway. A hooded man shoved Emma against a car as she kicked and screamed. Without thinking, Jake raced outside and tackled the assailant, receiving a punch to the face before the man fled into the dark. Shaken, Emma and Jake called the police. Between statements, Emma confessed a slew of strange occurrences. Cars idling outside for hours, footsteps trailing her home at night. She believed someone was stalking her but had no proof. The fuzziness of the assailant's features suggested planning. Jake recalled Mary's words that night with a chill. When the police left, Jake texted Mary about the attack, struggling to process it all. Her response dismissed his worries. Clearly a random act. Don't overthink. You're safe with me. Yet something felt calculated about targeting Emma alone. After she insisted on patrolling the property, Jake reluctantly departed, promising to check in soon. In his blurry state, Mary's familiar reassurances were almost convincing. But at home, doubt swirled as Jake Googled the incident, finding reports of escalating stalking sometimes turning deadly. Mary joined their call, chattering brightly as if unaware of Jake's inner turmoil. Her blithe confidence that Emma exaggerated clashed with his instincts. When she abruptly ended the call to rest, Jake paced his flat for hours, torn between the kind woman who soothed his loneliness and chilling possibility that darkness lay beneath. The next morning, Emma appeared shaken but composed over coffee, piecing clues together methodically. She recounted suspicious figures in neighboring yards as if monitoring her movements. Determined to stand up for herself, Emma agreed to install security and accept Jake's company until the perpetrator was found. With a start, Jake realized Emma truly saw him as a friend worth protecting too. His dependence on Mary began unraveling before harsh morning light. Jake knew he must tell the police about Mary's possessiveness, concealing something far more sinister. But severing the bond entirely meant facing his fears alone. And what proof existed against an anonymous online presence's innocuous words? He toyed with his phone, dreading the conversation that could shatter whatever remained between them. Jake avoided Mary's messages all weekend, torn between longing for solace and dread of what lay beneath. By Sunday night, ignoring the situation felt impossible. As he dialed, Mary's greeting held an edge that sank his heart. "Where have you been?" I was worried. Mary's concern seemed practiced. Jake took a deep breath. "We need to talk. The attack on Emma, your words that night, it can't be a coincidence." Silence answered him before Mary spoke coolly. "You really think I'd hurt someone? I care about you, Jake. This Emma is twisting your mind against me. Please, just tell me the truth. I don't know who to trust anymore." Jake's voice broke as old defenses crumbled. A sigh drifted through the line. "If you must know, I hired someone to scare her away. She was stealing you from me, Jake. I saw how much time you spent together. But it wasn't supposed to escalate, I swear." Jake shuddered, grasping for calm. "End it now before anyone gets badly hurt. Then leave me alone for good." "No. We belong together." Mary's veneer cracked, tone sharpening. "You promised yourself to me. If I can't have you, no one will." With that, the line went dead. Jake buried his head in his hands, agony and fear battling within. He had to warn Emma immediately. Grabbing his keys with shaking hands, he raced from the dark flat into the cool night. A knock brought Emma to the door in pajamas, eyes widening at Jake's panic. As he recounted the chilling conversation, her face paled in the porch lights. "We have to tell the police right away," she said, pulling on shoes and a jacket. "There's no time to lose." At the station, Jake struggled through retelling his story as officers exchanged grim looks. "We'll put extra patrols on Miss Williams' neighborhood," the sergeant assured. "For now, you both need around. The clock protection until we find this individual." Days passed in a haze as Jake stayed with Emma at her family's insistence, checking constantly for any sign of Mary. No contact came, yet her threat echoed in restless nights. Then, one morning, a knock came before dawn. The police had a lead. Following digital footprints, they traced payments to a known criminal with orders to take Emma out permanently. Closing in, fear and rage coursed through Jake's veins alike. This was about to end, one way or another. Jake paced the police station all morning, twisting his hands raw. Finally, a call came. They'd located Mary's base of operations and were moving in. He insisted on joining, receiving tense nods. Emma squeezed his arm. Armed backup ringed the darkened house as Jake and two officers approached the door. "Mary, it's over. Come out peacefully," the sergeant called. "Only silence," answered. They entered cautiously. Something metallic glinted under a closed door. Wires. Grenade. They scrambled back outside as an explosion blew the door apart. In a flash of orange, heart in his throat, Jake searched for Emma through choking smoke. "I'm all right," she coughed, clutching his hand. A creeping dread took over as they crept through the wreckage. Nothing remained of the upstairs but scorches and rubble. Had Mary escaped her trap? A creak came from the basement. Guns raised. They descended narrow wooden steps into musty dark. A lone bulb flickered to life, illuminating a figure huddled against the wall. Mary stared back with hollow eyes, phone clutched in death grip. "Please, I only wanted you to myself." Despite himself, pity joined Jake's torment. He'd never meant to drive her to such extremes. But compassion had its limits when lives were at stake. "It's over, Mary. Let Emma go now." She smiled sadly. "Never. If I can't have your heart, no one will." A click came from behind as Emma gasped. Jake spun to find Mary gripping a gun under Emma's chin, both wreathed in shadow. Rage and hatred twisted her once gentle face. He raised open hands. "Please, Mary, think about what you're doing. We can end this peacefully." Her laugh was cracked glass. "Can't you see? It ended long ago." Adrenaline surged through Jake's veins. In one frantic move, he lunged, grabbing the barrel to point skyward as a shot rang out. They crashed to the floor in a tangle. "Emma, run." She fled up the creaking steps as he grappled with Mary. A final crack, and she slumped limp into the dark. Jake dragged himself to her still form, checking desperately for a pulse. Nothing met his shaking fingers but silence. It was over at last. The shadow in his heart vanquished those scars would remain. On the street, he found Emma sobbing in a blanket, embracing her tightly as sirens wailed in the distance. A long road lay ahead, but together they would walk it and heal. For the first time in years, Jake felt the dawn of hope. John stared blankly at his computer screen, the lurid images flickering by in a blur. Another night, another haunting livestream searing itself into his mind. As the masked figure panned shakily down yet another nondescript street, John struggled to place where precisely this was unfolding. The neighborhood seemed so familiar, yet just out of reach. Then, in the distance, a landmark jumped out, the towering oak by the old library. John shot up in his chair, pulse pounding. This was merely blocks from his apartment. He yelled for his sister Claire, who came rushing in. It started again, and it's too close to home this time. "Look." Claire gasped as she peered at the screen. It was unmistakably their corner of the city, yet the twisting camera work captured it in a hauntingly alien light. A muffled noise arose in the distance. The figure swung around clumsily to focus on a dark alleyway. A huddled shape lay curled on the ground. As the figure crept forward, drawn like a moth to the flame, the shape erupted into a man desperately scrambling backwards on elbows and heels. His panicked moans carried even through the computer's tinny speakers. The mask loomed over the helpless stranger, its expressionless face more unnerving for what it kept hidden. A thick arm shot out, gripping the man's wrist in an unbreakable hold. He was dragged helplessly out of view, his cries fading into the night. The figure lingered a moment, panning slowly across the abandoned street, now heavy with a scene from a nightmare. Then, as abruptly as it began, the stream cut out, replaced by the host's ominous logo. Claire sank onto the couch, face drained of color. It's here. Who knows if that poor soul is even? John pulled up the dark corners of the web, hunting for any traces of the host or clues to their agenda. But as always, the phantom slipped through his grasp, leaving nothing behind but its sickening payload. "We have to do something before it's us out there," John muttered, staring at the address on screen as if answers could be willed into existence. Their seemingly safe streets had become a theater of terrors, with an unseen director pulling the strings towards unknown ends. And each night's performance crept ever closer to home. Chapter 2. Close to Home. That night, John lay awake, haunted by the man's cries. Somewhere in the city's shadows, who knew what fate had befallen him? A soft rustling roused John. Someone was at the front door. He crept down the hall, heart pounding. But it was only Claire, eyes red, rimmed from her own fitful sleep. "I checked the usual sites," she whispered. Still nothing new posted. Wherever that poor soul ended up. At least we didn't have to watch. John sighed, pulling her into a hug. But no reassurance could erase the lingering traces of fear imprinted on their streets. That evening, John and Claire tuned in warily to the usual broadcast time. Long minutes dragged by with no connection. Had last night's exploits finally satisfied the host's twisted thirst? Just as hope kindled, the stream crashed live onto their screens without warning. John's blood ran cold. It had returned, as unavoidable as a recurring nightmare, and this time it was broadcasting from directly outside their own building. Shaky footage peered down the street, panning slowly across familiar storefronts and parked cars. A lone figure trudged into view, oblivious to the sinister focus upon them. It was Mr. Wilson, their elderly neighbor, shuffling home with grocery bags. Before he knew what was happening, massive hands erupted from the shadows, wrenching his cries silent. The camera swiveled wildly, settling on Mr. Wilson's contorted face, locked in a rictus of terror. His mouth worked soundlessly as the figures melded into the enveloping night, taking him to whatever unimaginable fate awaited. The image lingered as John and Claire watched in horror, stunned witnesses to violations spilling into reality from the sterile safety of screens. Their secure world was fracturing like a broken mirror, its sharp reflections slashing at senses barely clinging to comprehension. John flung himself away, retching onto the carpet. All Claire could do was clutch his heaving shoulders, broken whispers of comfort lost to her own shock. After an eternity, John stumbled to his feet, wild-eyed. "We have to do something before it's us out there." Claire knew, with a sinking heart, he was right. But how do you fight a nameless terror seeping through the cracks of normalcy itself? That night, John dug deeper into the toxic recesses of the web. Somewhere in those labyrinthine passages, answers must lie. But with each disturbing crumb uncovered, a deeper, nameless dread took root. He found mentions of invite, only underground streams far removed from any regulations, events where anything was allowed, so long as audiences were sufficiently attentive and payments sufficiently extravagant. A notorious figure was named again and again as host of the most depraved live shows. Could this be the fiend hunting their streets under guise of entertainment? And if so, what malignant design did he harbor in snatching victims from the city's helpless bosom? John showed Claire his grim findings, hands shaking. "It's bigger than we thought, and I think it's only just beginning." Her breath caught in horror, for how does one fight a concealed evil seeping through society's very pores, twisting reality into a relentless nightmare? Chapter 3. Nowhere to Run. That night, the siblings found no rest. As they lay wakeful, a message flashed across John's screen. The broadcast had begun anew. With dread in their hearts, they tuned in to witness streets now hauntingly familiar. The camera prowled down winding back alleys, lingering on darkened doorways as if selecting its next plaything. Suddenly, movement. A lone teenager stumbled into view, headphones in, oblivious to the stalking presence. Before her muffled cries could carry far, massive hands seized her in a chokehold. She thrashed weakly as the captor dragged her out of sight, the camera panning away dispassionately. John and Claire stared, paralyzed as their city bled horrors into their very homes through screens that should keep reality at bay. Something had to be done. But how do you challenge a threat that melts back into the urban sprawl between atrocities? Clenching fists, they knew they had to follow the rivulets of fear, seeping through back alleys unseen. Quietly, they tracked the stream's path through dimly lit lanes, hunting for clues left in the wake of violence. A displaced pile of rubble, scrape marks on weathered walls, telltale traces that hinted at struggles cut mercifully from view. As they pieced together the brutal tableau, Claire grabbed John's arm. A faint noise carried on the night breeze. They froze, watching in mute horror as a hulking silhouette dragged writhing limbs into a deserted lot. The camera panned around to reveal them recoiling in shock and recognition. They had been followed, toyed with, cornered in the spider's web closing around their city. Their hearts stopped as the figure paused, cocking its head appraisingly. Before it could advance, John hurled a brick with unerring aim, cracking the camera lens in a shower of sparks. They bolted as heavy footfalls thundered in pursuit through the twisting alleys. At last, panting and spent in a secluded park, they dared to speak. The hunter had become the hunted, but their battle was just beginning. For how do you fight those whose power lies in keeping their quarry constantly off balance, twisting reality into a malign fantasies? Chapter 4. Beyond Reach. With the host's next broadcast, John and Claire knew they had to act. They tracked the stream winding through back alleys, hunting for signs of the abduction happening now. A piercing scream shattered the night, carrying even through the tinny speakers. They sprinted towards the sound, fear lending them speed. As they raced around a corner, the camera panned to reveal its prey, a young woman backed against a wall, face frozen in terror. Without thought, John tore a loose pipe from the ground and hurled it end over end at the camera. It crashed to the pavement in an explosion of glass and wire. Looking up in fear and desperation, the woman spotted John and Claire's outstretched hands. She seized them desperately, allowing herself to be pulled from that place of nightmares. Safely behind them now, she rasped how thankfully this nightmare was over. But John knew it would survive tonight only to continue elsewhere, if the host still moved free. They brought the woman to safety before returning to the shadows, following the host's shadowy trail. Pieces fell into place. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts was the focus of whispers on the dark corners of the web. Tonight, they would face this phantom and end its menace for good. The live stream flickered to life from within, unfocused camera panning across a scene of depravity that turned John's stomach. He burst through the door with Claire, a vengeful fury lending strength. They tracked the camera's cable back to its operator, pulling off the ghoulish mask to reveal nothing but a hollow-eyed automaton. Strings pulled by another. A chilling laugh carried across the warehouse as the true host stepped from the shadows to cold, mocking applause. But John was ready, hurling the pipe like a javelin. It tore through flesh with a dull, wet thud, felling the menace in a spreading pool of crimson. Sirens wailed in the distance as John met the lifeless eyes that had haunted his city. It was over, but the scars of violation remained etched on streets that could offer no shelter, even in places that once felt safest of all. Here and anywhere, no community is truly untouched from surrounding shadows.